When we do camera mapping, we have always to deal with one problem, because the camera that we have used to produce this image here has only one point in space and time. And so it can also only reduce the 4D, 3D plus time, to a 2D image. There's no time in it and only 2 dimension. And that means we have always only one option for each pixel here to represent something that was in a scene. We can't go behind the box and see what happens there. And so in the moment we project one image to this box here and to a background here to get a nice camera move here, we run into a problem, because the box by itself is then projected to the background as well. If we go very close to the object here and have a wide angle view, then we might not see the problem. But in the moment we move around, we run into that problem. And of course, we can't see behind the box, because that was not visible to the capture camera. And so we have to deal with those things in terms of painting, or fixing at least. And we can see here also we have only a limited area from this projection here on this plane. Anything that was not in the picture is then just repeated here, tiled, so to say. I can switch this off to make that even more visible. And then we have to deal with something like this here. So we have a border here, we have a border there, and it's even more visible here exactly in the top view, where we can see that the camera finally projects it onto that area, and this is exactly all we get. This small square is the box, it's not here. This is the projection of the box onto the floor. And so the whole area here with the huge box is exactly what we don't want to have in terms of the background. I will show you that here in Bridge. Yeah, I have another picture of the box with a more different background here, not just grass, because grass is relatively easy to fix. But the problem would be then in the shadow area. I'll show you that later on. And the image that I can take here, because the box is movable, is then just this here. So we miss here only out the shadow that this box cast. This here is only for demonstration purposes in it. You don't need this, but sometimes it's a good idea to have, of course, a reference card in it, and maybe even more. Okay, so we need for the background exactly this information, but with the shadow in it that the box casted. So you can see that here's a little change, and if you don't put this in for the background, it looks not in the way it should. So we can go maybe around, would be a nice idea. So when we do that, we lose the perspective of this. If the camera looks in a different direction, we have a different perspective to the parts in the scene. So let's go around this one here, and I take a picture from here. And now I have, of course, all the information. If I had the box here in the grass, I have to continue behind the box with the shadow, for example. Then I take a picture from here. But now all the grass would look wrong if I project it then from the front side. I will show you that here in Cinema 4D, of course. When I go to my perspective view, I go out of this camera here, and when I have this here now sorted out, so it looks pretty much where the original camera was, which is preferable, because all these perspective lines here, these perspective distortions, if they are not healed by the geometry, like this border here, then they look only right in the moment we have a similar position of the capture camera to the projection camera. When I go now around this one here, and you see already my point, this looks here already totally wrong. We expect now to see this side here, but it's hidden. And the other border of that card box here is now visible against our expectations. And when we take a look to the grass, it's pretty much totally weird now. I hope you get that idea here. It looks just distorted. It looks flat as it would be ironed on the floor. And that's of course something we don't want to have. From this point of view, it looks correct. And all the stuff goes here nicely, but exactly in the opposite direction it goes completely wrong. And I use here the shortcuts to make that faster. 1 and 2 and 3. So you see here, this looks just wrong. And from this perspective here, it looks more correct also. The box by itself, of course, is completely off when you go too far. And we will discuss this phenomenon, of course, in an extra episode. But just to go behind and shoot from there is maybe a little bit short-sighted, except when you have a very fast camera move and the details get eaten up by the motion blur and you have to deal only with the values in the picture, then maybe the eye will follow and say, okay, I buy this shot. Otherwise, I have to go into Photoshop and prepare exactly this cloner and paint everything as fast as possible. And of course, you don't have to clean up the whole cube. And I show you that when I click here the cube away. This would be here my picture. I go to the animation camera and everything that is now here cube should be taken away. Of course, not where the cube is. I can't look under the cube, but everything in the background. Otherwise, I get all these distortions here, and the floor looks maybe right to a certain degree, to a certain camera move. So I have to clone here a little bit, and when I know exactly the animation camera, how far it goes, for example, in this case, I go only in this direction, and I switch on the cube so you can see what I have in mind. I have no problems on the left side from the cube. I run only in problems here to the right side. So if I go maybe only so far, then I need only to to fix this area here. If you are tight in time, then this would help you here exactly to know this area needs to be fixed. A little bit the stone here, a little bit grass here, and so on. And as that is in motion, and when you have motion blur, don't bother too much with too fine details, because if the motion blur is really enabled and it eats away a lot of stuff, then mostly you get away with a relatively sloppy fix. But of course, quality is always key, and if you have the time to make it nicely, do it. So I have just created a copy, and in this copy I will work now. And normally I don't use the stamp tool directly on the picture because that's sometimes a little bit dangerous. So I use the stamp tool here and have an eye on all these options here, especially with rotation and offset and so on. It's a big help that you can go even and have your settings here, so you don't have to go always and grab a new point, and it's a huge help to get very familiar with these options here. So what I want to have, Control and Option down, a little bit bigger here, then Option or Alt, click here, and then I paint on my clear layer here, just like that. So this is very sloppy, and I want to show you, of course, how far I get with that. So I eat here a lot of stuff from the box away. I have to fix here the stone, so I go closer into that. I have here just in JPEG. Normally I would do this with an HDRI, but to speed up the process here, I do this here just, yeah, pretty much freehand. So smaller one to get some grass here in it. And maybe I take this from here, get some textures in it. And of course, when you do it in tutorial, then everything looks too slow and wrong and everything else. You might do this maybe better in a way when you have more time. Okay, So, and some final touches, and then merge everything and save it. And yes, I use JPEG here just to speed up the process. It's not based on quality, it's for demo purposes only. And so normally I like to work with HDRI, of course. So back in Cinema, I double click on my material, and I want to have, of course, now my copy here inside. I have to go to the right folder, of course, and go here to my copy. This should have a better name than copy, of course. That's based on your idea of naming convention. It loads here, and I hope it will disappear here soon. Yes. So now we have here the area cleaned up, and this is of course just to show you how it works, and now it looks just nice. Nice is of course relative here, but for the short amount of time that I had here, I think it's acceptable. And it has, of course, always more challenges in it. The background is maybe not that simple and so on. And I leave you here with that. And you get the idea that we have to fix stuff that the camera couldn't see when we have only one image. We can go around a little bit to the left and right, and we will discuss this in an episode, because to the left and the right is of course dependent how the camera in Cinema 4D, like this animated camera here, moves later on. And when we have a shot like that, then I would suggest have an eye on this camera here, the green one. It's now where the first shot was, and now this position should be roughly where the second shot is then taken from, because then the perspective of the image, the reduction and all of that, the perspective distortion, is nearly not visible from the same camera position, of course. I will go into that more in detail. See you in the later ones. And here you can see a result where I have used the displacer to get a little bit variety in the floor object. And that helps, of course, to convince the eye that there is not just a flat plane. Okay,